We better get going straight away because time is flying by. In this first session, there's going to be a report on a joint project that has been exploring using science and technology more effectively in tackling sustainable development goals. The lead body, I believe, is University College London, Professor Joanna Chataway, but with a lot of support from ACT, Pretoria, and the University of Sussex. The focus is on pathways for science research and innovation, where empirical data have been gathered to enable improved R&D policy. And the coordinator on this strings approach is Dr. Tommasso Ciarli, from Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. I shan't say anything more, but we'll carry on, and there'll be some panel discussion afterwards before we then move on to the case study on fisheries, which will be handled by Professor Juma. By Professor Mugabe. So, Tommaso, it's all for you.
Tommaso, I think you're muted.
Right. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So this makes it easier. Thank you very much. Okay. So let me start again. I hope you can see the slides. At least that was clear. Okay.
Yeah.
We can see it.
Good. Thanks a lot. Apologies. Let me start again. So first of all, thank you very much, Norma, for the introduction. And I'd like to thank Angela Christiana from the Calestous Juma Foundation, Tom Ogada from ACT, and John Mugabe and Paul Combo for inviting me to contribute to this fantastic event. And I would like to thank all the organizers for putting together such an excellent program and agenda to honor Calestous Juma. I'm deeply pleased, actually, and honored to see that the work that we have been doing with the Strings project, which I will introduce in a minute, is so well connected to the legacy of Calestous. And I must say here, I know there's going to be a lot of discussion and there's already been lots of introduction, but I think I should do that. I was lucky enough to meet Calestous once in my life. When he was giving a keynote lecture at the Atlanta Conference on Science and Innovation Policy, which was organized by Julia Melkers and Diana Hicks. And I think that actually John Mugabe and Ann Kingiri were members of the program committee at the time of the conference. I don't remember, I met them unfortunately, but I didn't know them at the time, but for sure I know them now. And at the time, Calestous gave a talk, which was titled Rebooting African Economies, column Science and Innovation for Development. And that talk was extremely relevant, I thought. And basically what he was arguing that, as already seen in the introduction, African countries could not sustain economic growth and promote prosperity without significant investment in technological innovation. And he was suggesting a bold attempt to reposition African countries as central players in the global knowledge economy, as a protagonist rather than as a recipient of knowledge. And he was mainly advocating three steps: the building of infrastructures, mainly digital infrastructure, to enhance innovation and knowledge sharing, technical competence and skills to improve science, technology, engineering, and mathematical education, STEMs, and technological-based entrepreneurship. And he was particularly emphasizing the role, as we all know, I've been emphasizing and studying the role of science-intensive technologies such as biotech, nanotech, and digital, now probably artificial intelligence. And he came up with two main messages, at least two messages that for me were particularly crucial. Sorry for the typo there. The first was emphasizing the strategic role of technological innovation in addressing critical challenges, such as meeting human needs, such as food and health, improving international competitiveness through trade in manufacturing goods, protecting the environment, so on and so forth. And I think this was already indicating basically the role of the Sustainable Development Goals, what became the Sustainable Development Goals afterwards. Remember, this was a talk in 2013. And afterwards became the report on rebooting African development, where it was clear how there was a need, this was expressed in the report, to develop national research and innovation capabilities in countries in order to reduce the reliance on external resources and the reliance on external science and technology. And at the end of the talk, I asked Calestous a question, which obviously he answered during the talk, but then led to a very nice, cordial, engaged, but also fun, as usual with Calestous, conversation in front of a beer, or maybe two, I can't remember, in Atlanta. And the question was about how can STI alone address the challenges of those who are most in need, including most people in the African continent, if those who develop science, technology, innovation tend to focus on technological objectives rather than human challenges, and their incentives are mainly economic incentives in one way or the other. Does such type of science technology do not increase inequality even more? And this is where we remain, and this is how we went on working to these questions and asked these questions again in several forums, and how this led to the Strings project. So I think this very important to mention this. So it's not a contribution, but it's very stimulating discussion with Calestous that made me think and keep working on these issues, and leading to this 2 years project. So we started the Strings project. Let me give you a little bit of background now on the project itself. From the quite well-known observation now that although science and technology solve and thus create as well many problems, like those that are related to the Sustainable Development Goals, scientific advance is quite unevenly distributed with respect to society and its diverse demands, and diverse demands is crucial, meaning that not all the problems which are prioritized in the same way in science, technology, innovation, and solutions affect people positively and negatively in very different ways. So it is obvious that there are priorities, there are resource constraints. What it is less obvious is that those priorities often do not match the problems of those who are most in need, and who are less represented in the science, technology, innovation system. And these may coincide with those who are the recipient of the who appear in the SDG targets, including in relation to poverty, to hunger, to health, so on and so forth. This is not new. There's been and has been persistent for a long time. It's been this strong emphasis on science for excellence, and it's still there today. And we see it in many different examples. We see it, for example, with regard to health investment, and where we observe that most of the investment in health is in relation to diseases which are relevant in the global north, but not in the global south. We've seen this quite strongly in the development of a vaccine, which for a global pandemic, which has remained closed and which has led to enormous inequity in terms of how the vaccine has been picked up and developed. And we see now with the recent events, we've seen this in the way in which the COP26 have ended, with still this idea, this very paternalistic idea that countries that pollute less should not pollute more, and the countries that are responsible for most of the pollution should take some measures, but not particularly strong measures. So there's still this very strong concern about aligning science, technology, and innovation to the human challenges, to human goals. And the SDGs are fundamental here, because at the same time, the priorities that came together with the Sustainable Development Goals, which were agreed amongst all countries and after a long discussion among very different constituencies, are a means for researchers, for public and private research funders, for policymakers, for society at large, to study which directions we should take in science, technology, innovation in order to progress toward sustainable development, in order to progress towards the SDG. And we should not miss this opportunity. We should use the indications of the SDGs, the problem which are highlighted, agreed in the SDGs, to make sure that what we do in terms of science technology innovation meet those, or contribute to meeting these goals. So this is the main aim has been for STRINGS, which is a global collaborative project led by the Science Policy Research Unit at Sussex in collaboration with UCL. I'll get now in a second to all the different collaborators here. But the main aim is really to provide evidence and tools and policy events and discussions such as these ones to map, illustrate, and better understand the alignments and misalignments between investment and priorities in science, technology, innovation, and the SDG, and to get to policy changes in order to improve steering of science, technology, innovation, investment in science, technology, innovation toward the sustainable development goals. And again, this is done by combining analytical effort and policy effort in order to provide tools that can be used by different stakeholders, by different constituencies, in order to define their own priorities in terms of STI, which may lead to the priorities in terms of SDGs. And we'll come back in a second to that in a second now. So as I said, this is a project which is led by the Science Policy Research Unit in collaboration with the UNDP. This was part of a memorandum of understanding between the UNDP and UKRI. And we have, as Norman mentioned, we have lots of collaborators in the UK, UCL, Nesta, but also abroad in the Netherlands, CWTN, UND Merit, and across the globe in Argentina, in India, and in South Africa and Kenya. But also, we have been involving several layers of engagement, several discussions with different experts, different communities across the globe in order to refine and revise our analysis and results as we moved on. So I'm not going to make any justice today to all the work that has been done by many colleagues. As we move on in the next following part of the workshop, there will be much more discussion, much more in depth of a very important part of the work that was carried on in Kenya. And there's much more that you will be able to see in the report, which will come up in February. So let me give you a little bit, tell you a little bit about again, the challenge here that we're facing. So we want to steer science, technology, innovation towards sustainable development goals much more than we can see now. But this is extremely complex. As you know, science, technology, innovation is a complex system. So the sustainable development goals are complex by themselves. There's a lot of interactions, there's a lot of trade-off. So we're dealing here with a very complex system, which ends up usually prioritizing the needs of those who are not particularly in need, and leaving aside not addressing the needs of the majority of the population, creating often inequalities. So in order to achieve sustainable development, there is a need to steer in this very complex system the science, technology, innovation, taking into account the diversity of science, technology, innovation, and the diversity of how people may prioritize in different contexts, different aspects of sustainability. So we are facing an enormous amount of complexity here. As you know, we have SDGs which do indicate very different potential ways to invest, very different priorities, very different ways of interpreting progress itself. And STI themselves are extremely different. They can move in very different directions, and they can address different aspects of sustainability in many different ways. And as we know, there are many different goals. There are many different targets which may be competing among themselves. There are many different ways of doing science, technology, innovation. There's different countries and regions and municipalities that face different sustainability problems. So obviously, we need to carefully consider not all, but the multitude, the plurality of ways in which science, technology, innovation, different forms of science, technology, innovation can address different aspects of sustainability. So how do we address this very complex challenge how did we address this very complex challenge in this project? And We did it by basically combining different levels of analysis, different analytical angles, different methods and discipline, and comparing those results across different levels of analysis in order to better understand, again, the multiple facets of science, technology, innovation, and the way in which they relate to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're looking particularly at the macroeconomic level, at trying to mapping and visualizing through global data, science, technology, innovation across time and countries, particularly looking at the past and how this has evolved and what has been prioritized by whom, where, in which location. And then we made projection towards the future and looking at very different constituencies, so beyond those who do science and research innovation, but those that use them, that practice science, technology, innovation, and ask them about their priorities. What are their priorities in the future? How do they see science, technology, innovation being able to address the SDGs? What they would prioritize if they were to address the SDGs in the future? And we did this across very different contexts and constituencies to get a map across the globe of that diversity in prioritized future STI. And then we focused down at a very micro level to understand what might be currently science technology pathways, different science technology pathways that are constituted, are developed, are reinforced or marginalized in order to address very specific challenges. And we will, the rest of the workshop today will focus a lot on one of these challenges. And we've done other case studies, but we're very similar in terms of the way in which we tackle the issues in addressing, in understanding in very local context, the multiplicity of different pathways and how they can address the SDGs. So I'll tell you in one slide for each of those what we did. So if we look at the global mapping, we asked questions about how does research innovation in relation to the SDGs, who does it, what it looks like, is it different from the rest of research? So to do that, we took a large amount of documents that basically come out from research innovation, from publications, from patents. And we mapped this document into different research areas across all potential disciplines, from health to life sciences to social sciences, math and physics, engineering, all disciplines that lead with science and technology. And then we took these research and innovation areas and we try to understand the extent to which this research innovation area relate to the different SDGs in order to make this mapping of what is going on, who does it, what are the characteristics of this research. As I said, then in the second part, we went to ask different constituencies across different parts of the globe and stakeholders that have very different background experience working in very different contexts. What are the SDG, the technologies, that they see as more relevant in order to address the SDGs by 2030. So we left this question about the science conservations very open, and we interviewed both practitioners and researchers, asking questions about how different stakeholders and communities prioritize different STIs, and opening up beyond what can be captured by data about the past in publications and in patents. And then in the case studies, we mapped at least two different, in the case of Kenya, three alternative science, technology, innovation pathways in three different locations. So we focused in Odisha, in India. We looked at the way in which climate resilient seed is developed, so something which is actually quite close to Calestous research, to address climate stresses and obviously to make the production of rice more productive in order to address hunger. So in this case, we're looking at developing the rice seeds in order to address a number of challenges related to SDG 1, poverty, 2, hunger, 3, health, 8, growth, 10 inequality, but also sustainability, such as climate change, 13. And then we looked at different forms of doing science in Argentina to address an endemic illness such as Chagas, and how different ways of doing science, from very closed types of science and very open type of science, how these different types of science may address best the challenges, SDG challenges related to Chagas, again in relation to poverty, in relation to health, in relation to gender, education, technological innovation, so on and so forth. And the third case study, which we will talk a lot today, was done in order to understand how different pathways may address conflict around overfishing in the Lake Victoria region in Kenya. So again, addressing issues related to SDG 1, poverty to hunger, but obviously conflict and governance 16, and life below water 14. So let me give you just a very quick snapshot of what we found. And some of the key findings include some of the things that we already knew, but it's good to see them, and it's good to discuss them and put them in front of policymakers at every level. Higher income countries, which dominate research agenda because they constitute 94% of research innovation which is done in the world, publish the lowest proportion of research which is related to the Sustainable Development Goals. Low-income countries, such as African countries, have much more focus on Sustainable Development Goals, but they represent a minimum amount of the formal production of knowledge which we observe in publications and in patents. So there are very few opportunities for knowledge transfer and capability building in low-income countries, especially in research related to the social challenges. And although there's there is substantial research in SDG, which is mainly focused on SDG 3, so on health and well-being, and this constitutes 60% of that little research which is done in relation to the SDGs. Most of this research is related to diseases which are relevant in the North, but not particularly relevant in low-income countries. So there are very few efforts to address the complex underlying societal issues which are related to inequalities, conflict, than to research which is mainly leading to technological solution, the more immediate issues that can be solved, but also creating lots of other problems. We also identified some opportunities which are very good to mention. So research in low-income countries, as I was saying, is strongly related to the SDGs. So we need more research done in low-income countries. As simple as that. A number of synergies exist between research in different SDGs, and we can and we should exploit those because we need to better understand the trade-offs and synergies among the different SDGs. And we also found that SDG-related research, especially on social challenges, societal challenges, is more multidisciplinary, more likely to be used in policy, in news, and the media, and is highly rated by standard academic methods. Again, the bad news is that it's not particularly well funded. When we looked at the ways in which countries' priorities in terms of doing research in relation to different SDGs is related to their challenges, to their SDG challenges, also we found quite dismal result. So we did find that countries that have higher challenges in terms of poverty, in terms of hunger, in terms of health, and in terms of clean water and sanitation, so 4 SDGs, tend to do more research on these SDGs. But that's it. For all other SDGs, including, again, the example of the climate-related SDGs, countries that have challenges which are large challenges in relation to these SDGs. Take, for example, the pollution generated by high-income countries, do not devote a higher proportion of their research to address these challenges. So there is strong misalignment at the country level between what the priorities of these countries are and what their research priorities are. Now, when we looked at the future priorities, and then we also found that when we asked people, and we asked here about 1,500 people around the globe, again from different constituencies, from very different contexts, on the different SDGs, on different problematics, What we find, including from researchers, is that future priorities do not align very well with past research development, with past innovations, with what we've seen done so far, which has been predominant so far. And priorities are indicated particularly beyond these technological fixes, the science and technology focus that we seem to see most of the investment in science, technology, innovation. And what is most indicated as addressing the SDGs is innovations in models, social innovations, policy innovation, so on and so forth. And we also found a very different understanding of what SDI are, what SDGs are, and how to combine SDI to the SDGs. And obviously these differences are pretty strong when we look at different stakeholders, different contexts, different expertise. And this is very important, leading to our last set of findings in the case studies, again, that we'll discuss much more later on. So what we did see is that in order to align science, technology, innovation with the SDGs, we need to consider the very many different ways, the very many different directions, many different pathways that can be developed in order to, in science, technology, innovation, in addressing the SDGs. And this is because, as we've seen, people have very different priorities, including the researchers and the users. And this leads, obviously, to the need to nurture different pathways, because different pathways, different science, technology, innovation pathways have different ways of addressing the SDGs. And these different ways are often equally relevant, but in very different ways. So if we look at different aspects which are related, for example, to the development of rice seeds, from economic, nutrition, accessibility, plant resistant, and we look at the two different pathways that we compared, again, we see that different stakeholders have very different views about how one pathway can be not particularly good on some of the targets, SDG targets, but can be much better on other of the targets. So we need to nurture that plurality and that diversity. Let me conclude with a few recommendations, a few areas of actions that we suggest in the report. And let me start from the last finding, which was again about ensuring that we build on the richness of the diverse way of doing science, technology, innovation. As Calestous was saying, one of the things that can make us positive about the future is that there's so many different people thinking about solutions, and we have to nurture those different ways of looking at science, technology, innovation. We have to nurture and include these different people and their ideas, because if we don't include them, it's going to be a huge welfare loss. So we need national, local, international governance for science, technology, innovation, for sustainability that maintains, open up, encourage these different trajectories of science, technology, innovation, and these different ways of interpreting the main issues related to science, to development goals, sustainable development, and the different technological trajectories that can contribute to them. So we need to have open spaces for questioning analytical findings, including the findings that I've just presented, from different perspectives, and use them from different perspectives, as we'll see in a minute. So these mappings that are essential, as we say in a minute, need to be complemented by discussions about how different priorities may be encouraged in different, and may be played with in different contexts. We also discuss ways in which we may need, at this stage, a better global coordination of STI efforts and global understanding and steering of STI. We know that, as we've seen, most of the investment is in high-income countries. So we need to monitor that investment in order to make it more relevant for the SDGs. So we sort of suggest that we may need global platforms that may collect data, use data, discuss data, as we said before, including different stakeholders, in order to better inform our decisions, the decisions of policymakers around the globe about future funding. So instead of having single funders, having constellations of funders that gain with policymakers and users using open data can coordinate on defining priorities, again, which are going to be different priorities across different contexts. And this is what the way in which just puts it. If we had to think about the UN system today and generating a UN and starting a UN system today, that UN system would probably start with questions about knowledge and innovation at its core. It's very different timing from the end of the Second World War, but this is what we would probably what a new UN system would look like. So we have to encourage that. And the third main area was, as I said, about being able to empower stakeholders to use open data, open access data, in order to, in this case, build their different interpretation of what different areas in relation to science, technology, innovation that we see, and this is one particular SDGs, SDG 9, what of these different areas might be relevant to addressing the SDGs in their particular context. So the data that we provide here, we suggest is used to open up discussions rather than being used in order to close down with very specific decisions. And we make this data open so that it can be used as a tool. And finally, a number of policy interventions that we do recommend may be taken relatively soon in order to address the misalignments between Sustainable Development Goals and science, technology, and innovation. And we have four main recommendation areas. The first one is definitely increasing funding for SDG-related research innovation, as we've seen, is not doing well. And this can be done particularly involving a wider range of actors in order to increase that diversity of views, again, across different countries, focusing particularly on low-income countries, because as we said, in low-income countries is where research is most related to the SDGs, and in that also prioritizing international collaborative research, which is done in a much more equitable and open way than it is done now. Second, prioritize underlying social issues instead of simply looking at technological fixes, particularly looking at social innovations and informal research. This requires to focus on STI areas that are related to different SDGs. So opening up from that very discipline focus and challenge focus and trying to focus on areas which are more open and can understand better how the different SDGs and different problems across different SDGs interact. And this requires inter and transdisciplinary research, particularly transdisciplinary research, which involves users in the research. And also different approach, multidimensional approaches to evaluate the outcome of STI, so not just excellence, but also impact, learning, usefulness, relation to SDGs, so on and so forth. And third, strongly revise the priorities in STI portfolios because they're not particularly well aligned with the SDGs. So again, combining excellence with the need to addressing challenges, and particularly giving a premium to research that address local challenges rather than trying only to publish in the best journals. And finally, overarching, we need better data. We need better data to capture informal innovation. We need better data to capture what people do in terms of innovating, because we know very little, and it's very difficult to assess the huge efforts which are taking in science and innovation across the globe, particularly in low-income countries, without better data. And with this, I'd like to thank you all very much for your patience and listening, and really looking forward to share the report when it is out in February, and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Tommaso. That was very comprehensive. I'm not sure how to proceed here, Alison. Maybe you can give me some advice. Would it not be best just to go straight on, because we're way ahead of the schedule, or behind the schedule rather, to the case study on aquaculture? What do you think?
Why don't we take one or two questions?
1 or 2 quick questions.
Quick questions, just to, yeah, I think we'll make up some time later.
Okay. Do I see any raised hands?
There's some questions that were
questions
posted
in the chat box.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
I can read them out for you.
There are 37 here.
The specific questions. I can read them.
Yes, can you? Yes.
Yeah,
please.
I can. Yeah,
Please,
yeah.
yeah.
So the first one was posted by, I think, yeah, Professor Tomogada, who indicates that 2030 is just less than 8 years away, while some research projects take long to translate into use. This leads to the thinking that for the realization of SDGs in Africa, should we invest more in the use of existing STI solutions than STI research? What is your take on this? And I think this links to what Alphonse Otiato indicated, that, how can the people from Lake Victoria benefit from Calestous Juma huge contribution in knowledge terms and physical development. But I guess knowledge, the knowledge that has been generated, how can we harness it rather than do more research? So, Tommaso, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, sure. Thanks. Thank you, Tom, and thanks, Alphonse, for the questions. This is absolutely extremely relevant, and it's extremely good point. And I think it is very important to use what is out there. It is very important to use the science, technology, innovation which is available, but I think we shouldn't fall in the trap of always prioritizing the short term at the cost of the longer term development. And again, I go back to the sort of principles on which my understanding of the discussion with Calestous was in that event, about building infrastructures, about building capabilities in STEM, and which was a very long-standing research from colleagues as proof for a long generation, that we need to build the capacities to innovate. So using is very important to address in the short term SDGs, but again, I don't think we should fall in that trap that then countries, localities, people remain dependent. And I go back to that second major point from Calestous again, is that independence, is that not being reliant on others' investment. Because when we see that most of the research priorities so most of the priorities in science, technology, innovation in many low-income countries is dictated by donors, then what is the possibility that local stakeholders can prioritize what is actually relevant? So if you use and you're taking from the shelf, you need a shelf that is useful for you, and you need to build that shelf. And to build that shelf, you need the production of research and innovation. So I would balance basically the short-term targets of 2030 with the longer terms targets that the African countries have in terms of development.
Yeah, another quick one. Somebody's asking, this is Stephen, who's asking if you saw in your mapping exercise any difference in trends between Latin America, Asia, and Africa in terms of STI in relation to SDGs.
Yeah, so definitely, we see that some of the countries in Asia are much more related to those that we could call technofixes, right? We would call particularly in relation to energy. So there's huge investment in solar panels, huge investment in technologies to address water and sanitation issues. In African countries, it's much more about the societal challenges. It's much more about addressing SDG 1, poverty, 2, hunger, health. But again, I think what is important to stress there is how historical donors' patterns have influenced these priorities. And many of the Asian countries and many of the Latin American countries have developed more research and innovation capabilities to become independent from the donors, and therefore to define the research priorities. Although even there, if you look at the Chagas program, as our colleagues have shown, local funders, in investigators in Argentina are able to address more efficiently issues related to Chagas when they collaborate with other partners across the globe. And the same thing, all the researchers that do research and innovation on this particular disease in Latin America from the US are much more relevant, do research which is much more relevant when they collaborate with local researchers, which is again these very strong issues about you need to involve researchers from the local setting.